Sarah's life had been neatly divided into two distinct eras, before Mark left and after Mark left. The former was filled with the chaotic, if comforting, noise of shared responsibility, dinner discussions, divided chores, and the implicit reassurance that if one fell, the other would catch them. The latter was silent, punctuated only by the clanging reality of paying the rent solo and the constant, unnerving feeling of alone. Leo, her 7-year-old, was a miniature reflection of the joy that still existed in her world, a mop of sun-streaked hair, perpetually scuffed knees, and a laugh that sounded exactly like wind chimes on a breezy morning. They lived in a small apartment where the kitchen doubled as Sarah's workspace for her freelance graphic design gigs, and their ritual involved making, super-powered, pancakes every Saturday. But beneath the surface of their cheerful routine, Sarah was constantly tired, stretching the few dollars she earned like thin elastic bands, always worried they might snap. Mark hadn't been a malicious man, just a weak one, and when the pressure of fatherhood and financial reality became too much, he simply stepped out the door, leaving behind a note that spoke more of his fear than of apology. Sarah had cried that day, but only for an hour, because Leo had needed her to read him a story about a brave knight, and the knight couldn't have a teary mother. The night it happened was a Tuesday, the kind of dreary, forgettable evening where Sarah was trying to meet a tight deadline while Leo was quietly assembling a new Lego spaceship in the corner. Around 11 o'clock, she heard a strange, strained whimper. She rushed over, and the sight of Leo shocked her. He was burning up, his skin radiating heat, his eyes wide and unfocused. His breath was coming in shallow, ragged gasps. The thermometer flashed 104.7 degrees. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her chest. This was beyond teething fever, this was a crisis. Her first instinct, ingrained from the before Mark left era, was to call out his name, to look for his stable, calming presence to take the wheel. But the apartment was silent. There was no Mark, no partner to hand the keys to, no other adult to delegate the terrifying task of emergency transportation and paperwork. This was it. This was her moment. The moment she realized the simple, brutal truth: she was the only one standing between her child and disaster. She was no longer just the mother, she had to be the parent who acts, the parent who lifts, the parent who commands. The drive to the emergency room was a blur of frantic prayers and focused action. She kept one hand on Leo's burning forehead, murmuring reassurances she didn't fully believe herself, while the other gripped the steering wheel, running a quick mental inventory of insurance cards, pediatrician contact numbers, and the tiny emergency stash of cash she kept for disaster. At the hospital, the chaos was overwhelming. The bright, sterile lights and the distant, electronic beeping seemed to amplify her isolation. When the nurses finally whisked Leo away, telling her they needed to stabilize him, Sarah was left alone in a plastic chair in the crowded waiting room. She sank into it, the adrenaline draining away, replaced by an exhaustion so profound it felt physical. She remembered the nights Mark would have handled the talking, the logistics, the stoic facing of the medical staff, allowing her to simply be the comforting, emotional presence. Now, she had done both. She had been the hysterical, terrified mother in the car, and then, the moment she walked through the hospital doors, she had instantly morphed into the composed, information-spitting advocate, answering questions about symptoms and medical history with clinical precision. Later, while Leo was resting peacefully after medication, his fever finally dropping to a manageable temperature, Sarah excused herself to the hospital restroom. She locked the stall door, leaned her head against the cold metal, and finally allowed the dam to break. The sobs were silent but wrenching, fueled not just by fear, but by rage at her predicament. She needed a break, a voice to share the terror with, a hand to hold. When she finally looked up into the harsh fluorescent light, she saw her reflection, eyes red-rimmed, face streaked with tears, yet her posture was still rigid, still ready. In that moment, staring at her own reflection, she made a silent, internal pledge. She wasn't going to wish Mark back. She wasn't going to lament the loss of her partner. She was going to mourn the loss of the idea of a shared life, and then she was going to bury that idea. The help wasn't coming. The co-pilot seat was empty. And that was okay, because she had learned to fly the plane herself. She walked back to Leo's bedside, her face carefully wiped clean of tears, and found him awake, lucid, and staring at her with wide, innocent eyes. "Mommy," he whispered, his voice thin, "why isn't Dad here?" The question was a low blow, perfectly innocent, yet piercing her renewed resolve. She didn't offer a vague excuse or a soft lie about a work trip. Instead, she took his tiny hand and held it firmly. Sweetheart, Dad is on his own path now, and sometimes people need to walk on different paths. But you know what? Look at us. We are a team, and tonight, we were the bravest team in the whole hospital. I got you here, the doctors made you all better, and I was right here the whole time. You only need one amazing team member, and that's me. We're going to be okay, Leo. We're always going to be okay. It wasn't just a promise to him, it was a commitment to herself. She spent the rest of the night checking his vitals with the nurse, asking sharp, specific questions about his medication, calling her boss to explain the delay, and simultaneously spoon-feeding Leo a tiny bit of ice chips, the comforting mother, the practical provider, all fused into one tireless being. Leo's recovery was swift. They returned home to a new dynamic. Sarah didn't just tuck him in, she checked the lock on the door and tested the smoke detector batteries, small, practical acts that previously belonged to the Dad column. Financially, the hospital stay had delivered a crippling blow, but instead of panicking, she channeled her anxiety into creativity. Remembering her lifelong love for sewing, she started creating intricate, custom-made patches and children's accessories, selling them on an online marketplace in her spare time between her freelance work. It was exhausting, but every sale was a victory she earned, a small piece of proof that she could not only sustain them but build them back up, dollar by dollar. Leo, sensing his mother's new strength, transformed too. He became her tiny helper, meticulously sorting thread and offering thoughtful observations that were far too mature for his age. They weren't just mother and son, they were allies in a quiet, beautiful war against scarcity and loneliness. Years passed, the memories of that frightening night faded, replaced by the quiet confidence of a solid, independent life. Sarah never remarried, never even dated seriously, she was too busy building a fortress for herself and her son, brick by brick. When Leo graduated high school as the class valedictorian, he looked out at the audience, found his mother, and dedicated his speech not to a singular hero, but to the woman who taught me that strength isn't about being big or loud, but about showing up, every single time. Sarah finally allowed herself to look back at the terrifying isolation of that Tuesday night, not with bitterness toward Mark, but with profound gratitude. It was the night the safety net vanished, forcing her to realize she was the safety net. It was the crucible that forged her resilience, the moment she stopped waiting for a partner and realized she was already whole, already enough, already both parents, the nurturer and the protector, the heart and the shield. The most powerful lesson wasn't about being a single parent, it was about acknowledging the limitless power that lies within every person forced to stand alone. Outro 39, 00-40, 00. That strength, friends, is what we celebrate here on Stories That Mend. Sarah's journey wasn't unique in its pain, but it was extraordinary in its outcome. It shows us that sometimes, the greatest tragedies are simply the opportunities we needed to discover our greatest personal power. If this story of resilience resonated with you, if you've ever had to learn to be your own hero, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and most importantly, subscribe to Stories That Mend. We release new narratives of hope and healing every week, because everyone deserves a place where their heart can find a little peace. Until next time, keep mending.